Okay, let me explain why you need to watch Skinamarink, a new ultra low budget horror film that's now in theaters. And it's not because it's particularly a good movie per se, but because it may be an important one. Now, on this channel, I often talk about how story structure, the pacing of the plot points, and following strict beats, for better or worse, will be the strongest indicator for whether a narrative is successful or not. And this is an aside to how well developed the character arcs are within the greater themes and philosophical dilemma. And it is the formula that Hollywood has used for decades that when a film, usually unwittingly so, doesn't adhere to these beats, it tends to fail, unless the movie is doing so with purpose, like that which the Coen brothers or Paul Thomas Anderson or Tarantino can get away with, for reasons that I won't pretend to sum up quickly here. But this is hardly ever achieved with horror, save for the recent film Barbarian, which nailed this subversion of structure just slightly, yet successfully. But Skinamarink is, well, okay, so story structure is king. However, what often gets talked about by the likes of Tarantino is that we are in a very stale time or era of Hollywood, similar to how the 80s and maybe the 50s were, where formula ruled over invention, and generally few risks were taken by any filmmakers. But I saw two movies back to back that showed me that maybe this period may be coming to an end. Except audiences did not turn out for the first film, so I'm hoping they will for this. So I watched Babylon 2 nights ago, and I'll be talking about Damien Chazelle's fearlessness as a filmmaker in a future video, but it's safe to say that risks were taken. But then I saw Skinamarink, which took subversive storytelling to a whole other level, and I was not at all expecting to see the film that I saw. So honestly, I only went to go see this film because of the hook, that it had a $15,000 budget, basically a student film, which that interests me because I'm creating my own low budget horror, and I wanted to see frankly what I have to compete against. And after seeing it, I questioned the thousands of dollars I spent on cameras and lenses when in sincerity, I could have shot it on an iPhone 6 and cut it in iMovie. In fact, it looks like something I would have made in my 20s and been just too embarrassed to show anybody, because who wants to watch my weird ass home movies? And again, it's not because it's a bad movie at all, it is I'm recommending you watching it, especially if you are a filmmaker or a horror fan, as the redeeming qualities outweigh its otherliness. And first of which, that is, it is an extremely experimental picture, and it is an experiment of a film. So I hope I'm making this clear, as it's not a horror that you're thinking you're going to see. So if you like standard paranormal activity type flicks or just normal movie going experiences, it's not that. It's taking big swings and not shying from directorial or narrative risks at all. In fact, in hindsight, it would have been a lot more invigorating for me if this film was an experimental film in length too, since most films are running longer and longer. So what if they made this film like a 44-minute long film tops, and then we paid like half the ticket price? That would have been another swipe at novelty, yet I do get the logistics of that. But this brings me to the biggest issue I have, is that it was really bloated. Like, it's a great short film, but it feels like it was forced to have a certain runtime so they could submit it to festivals as a feature film, which I guarantee you that's why the film is the length that it is, because the story, quote unquote, would have worked better if it was cut dramatically down, because it's more like a montage of images that peak to some crescendo of tension under some subtext of story elements. However, what's extraordinary about this film is its cinematography, and I don't mean like technically how it was shot, but in the composition of each shot. They are just gorgeous, and if you see it and you see things like it, you know. They hold on these unorthodox shots from extremely atypical angles and mostly at walls, and only occasionally indirectly as subject. It's bizarrely beautiful and dark, as if darkness was the main subject that the camera was aiming towards. Darkness as the lead character, which not just adds an unnerving quality helping to build the tension, but it adds meaning where usually there is none. This can be attributed solely to the lo-fi way the image was captured, and then overlaid with a gratuitous amount of grain. Okay, I hate to be super critical here, but they also use a really cheap overlay, as in real film grain does not act this way in the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and you shouldn't see the scratches repeating. Now, if they just use a website like Dehancer.com, which is a film emulator for all your editing softwares that gives you real film grain emulation that will respond differently and in the shadows as it does in the highlights. So if you go to Dehancer.com and put in my promo code BCAT, you'll get 10% off, and you can use it in Lightroom and Resolve Resolve and Premiere and Final Cut, and it'll make what you shot look like it was authentically shot in film and not digitally like they tried to do in Skinamarink. So again, Dehancer.com, BCAT for promo, and you'll get 10% off. Okay, thank you. Now back to, which is likely meant to cover the cheap digital noise of the poorly lit shots. So you end up with a lot of life within the nothingness, a lot of texture within all those blacks, and that's the spooky part. You're hanging on an empty doorway, and blacks are not just blacks. Blacks are, the loud static of potential, the granule elements of our unknown, with the rips and tears across cellulite, creating a canvas for nightmares. And for me, as a kid, I too remember the nighttime, the shadows in the dark, the blackened corners of the room, that which is the most empty being the most terrifying. Looking into those depths where the mind created stories, non-linear, nonsensical, but full and horrifying. And I think that was the impetus of this movie. From a child's perspective, what do you remember seeing when you looked into the dark? You didn't see just blacks. You saw everything your imagination could project onto it. And that is where true fear resides. And for me, that is a great idea. This is a great motif to attempt to build a film around. Now, this film may not have delivered upon that idea fully, but I love the fact that they tried. And this is why you should see it for yourself, that an experimental art house horror made for $15,000 was given a theatrical release. Honestly, and on the complete inverse extreme of this, Babylon have given me hope that maybe things are changing. Filmmakers are taking risks, and maybe this is just a normal cyclical rebound or backlash from formula and superhero films. Regardless, I believe you should support this movie because you may even love it. You may hate it, or you may just think it's funny, but it's worth watching if you like horror, and it's worth watching if you also want the landscape of cinema to change, to take more risks. So I say support that change and go see Skinamarink. Not because it's necessarily a good film, but because it could be an important one. Okay, thanks. Bye.